Hey, okay. Um, well, the title that I came up with, and whether or not the content meets the title, is up to you. We'll figure it out. Um, is kind of reading into the Lenten readings, and it was also subtitled "From the Desert of Temptation to the Mountain of Transfiguration." Um, those are the first two Gospels for Lent. Last week, the temptation in the desert, and this coming week, we have the Transfiguration. But what happened was, I when I was back in school, grade school, uh, I think as far back as I can remember, I was always fascinated by what is now being called the STEM fields: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I like that stuff. And, from whatever class I had in grade school to the signing up for the classes in high school and even in college, I made sure I had some connection with um, something having to do with science or technology or engineering. In fact, prior to pursuing the track that I am on in terms of occupation and vocation, I was actually considering a career in either engineering or some kind of technology. If you had asked me in eighth grade, what do you want to be when you grow up? Then I would have said either technology or engineering would have been the field that I'd be in. Of course, technology was a lot simpler back then. We had the wheel, we had fire, and we had a stick. That was pretty much it. But in any case, since I was fascinated by it, I find that, I would try to figure out how something worked, figure out what was going on kind of behind the scenes that you couldn't see that was making it work. Or, I'd take things apart and figure these things out. So, that was what my fascination, my interests were at the time. And then, of course, I went into the seminary and I found myself applying a lot of that curiosity to theology and especially to the Bible. And so when I would see something or read something or hear something, I'd say, well, what else is going on? Or, how did it get to this point? Or why do they do it this way? Those were the kind of questions I was asking. And it occurred to me that I did that with the scripture readings that we have at Mass. Now, sometimes, I'd be reading a gospel and thinking about what's the rest of the crowd thinking? What are they saying among themselves? I want to get behind the scene to see how things were working. How did that work? And when we came to the Lenten scriptures, I thought the one thing that puzzled me was, what is the Transfiguration doing in the middle of Lent? Well, at the beginning of Lent, anyway. I thought, well, let me do some investigating. Let me do some research. Let me start picking things apart and seeing what I could find out. Now, all of us who've been around the Catholic Church for any length of time know that scripture readings that we hear as part of our liturgy are all predetermined. I mean, some of the little storefront churches, or even some of the mega churches, especially if they have a celebrity pastor, the scripture that they preach on is kind of the preacher's choice. He decides which ones he wants to preach on and which passages he wants to avoid. And we don't have that as Catholics. We have all of our scripture readings set out for us and said, these are the readings for this particular day, the 3-year cycle that we have. And so, it got to the question, visual aids, okay, that I was thinking, well, how do they get this book? What did they do to put together these readings, these scripture readings that we call a lectionary? Well, we have it, we're used to it, we use it all the time, but where did it come from? Why do they put these readings on these days and so on? And I got to thinking about that. And I, speculating in some cases, because I don't really know for sure. I've never talked to anyone who actually worked on designing the lectionary. And so, but we're used to it, we kind of take it for granted almost. And that's one of the things that always seem to pique my interest, are things we took for granted. Like, why do we take this for granted? One of the things that I found out in doing some research is that we're not the only religion that has a lectionary. In fact, most of the mainstream major organized religious groups, Episcopalians, Lutherans, Methodists, they have their own lectionary too. They have preset readings for days. And the interesting thing that I found out is that it's a common lectionary. In fact, it is called the Revised Common Lectionary. And their lectionary is practically the same as ours. They have a 3-year cycle. The scripture readings fit with the various seasons and so on. And they're the same readings. In other words, what we heard in the Catholic weekend for the first Sunday of Lent was being read in Episcopalian and Lutheran and Methodist and whoever else kind of subscribed to that Revised Common Lectionary. Same reading. Mark's Gospel of the Desert Experience, the temptation of Jesus. And if you look through the rest of the readings of Lent, there is almost an identical set of readings for every Sunday in each of the 3-year cycles, with 2 exceptions, 2 anomalies. One is a pretty big anomaly, and that's the Sunday that's coming up. The second Sunday of Lent, only the Catholic lectionary deals with the Transfiguration. The other scripture readings for the second Sunday of Lent are completely different in the Revised Common Lectionary. And I thought, well, that's kind of strange. We're following one another, or, we're sharing the same readings, all except this one week, the second Sunday of Lent. And that's the other thing too, is that in the Catholic Church, the second Sunday of Lent, no matter which year you happen to be in, is always going to be the Transfiguration. It's Matthew's Transfiguration in A, Mark in B, Luke in C. And I thought, well, that's strange, that Catholics seem to be obsessed with this idea of putting the Transfiguration in Lent. Now, the thing that comes to mind, of course, is that traditionally, Jesus begins telling his disciples about his coming passion. In fact, let me see if I can find it here, that I think it's in the in Cycle B, that the gospel reading for the second Sunday of Lent in the Revised Common Lectionary is indeed Jesus telling his disciples that he's going to have to suffer and die. And of course, that's kind of the tail end of the Transfiguration. And so that, in a sense, there's that tradition that says the Transfiguration took place about 40 days before the Passion. Well, would put it in Lent, I guess. And so it was intended, as our faith says, to help the apostles get through the difficult time that's coming. In other words, just to give them a booster shot that, yeah, the suffering's coming, but hey, look at the glory, and that whole idea of the Transfiguration presents that. And so I got to thinking about, okay, wait, what are the themes of Lent? Obviously, the idea of sharing in the fasting, Jesus 40 days in the desert. Okay, that's a good Lenten theme. The other thing about the lectionary is that the gospel story becomes kind of the touchstone for a particular week, particular season, a particular feast. And from what I understand, that's where the lectionary started. It starts with selecting a gospel for this day, or this feast, or this season, showing that gospel, whatever the theme of that gospel is. Then they went back, to whoever these people are who put this thing together, they went back to the Old Testament to find something that would relate to the gospel from the Old Testament. So from the Old Testament, where Adam and Eve are facing temptation and they don't resist the temptation. It gives that kind of balance. So there you see the two readings kind of relating to one another. And when I usually prepare a homily, I start with the gospel. I read the gospel. I think about the gospel. I pray about the gospel reading. And once I have a pretty good idea of what this gospel is saying to me, then I go back and read the first reading. And then I read the second. And then I read the gospel again in light of what I had just read. So last week was a bit of a challenge because I read the gospel. Jesus goes to the desert. He's tempted. He's ministered to by wild beasts and angels. Okay, and then he comes out of the desert. Mark, of course, doesn't give us a lot of detail about the temptations like Matthew and Luke do, but we have the general idea of the temptation in the desert. Then I went back and read the first reading, and I thought, Noah, end of the flood. What the heck does that have to do with temptation or with fasting or with this suffering kind of thing? Noah's been riding high. I had to kind of work with that. Now I came up with the idea that, that's what God was doing was fixing creation in both senses. In the Old Testament, he fixes creation by grabbing Noah and his family and animals from every species and pulling them out and letting them ride out the destruction that the rest of creation is going through. So, okay, way to fix creation, wipe out the old stuff, start over, hit the reset button. And then Jesus comes along and he takes a different approach. He, instead of pulling the good people out and sparing them the destruction, he sends a good person in to turn things around, begin changing things. Instead of wiping it out completely, deals with it. If you look at Matthew and Luke's stories of the temptation, Jesus does not punch out Satan. He doesn't zap him. He doesn't disintegrate him or vaporize him. What he does is he bandies with him. Turn the stones into bread. Not by bread alone does man live. Jesus begins twisting creation around to where it ought to be. And I thought, okay, that's one theme that comes through the beginning. And so then it becomes a matter of taking a look at the other scriptures. Like I said, we have the Transfiguration coming up this week. Yeah, Jesus is, is showing that even within this human being, there is something more at work. There is that power that makes his clothes dazzlingly white, that puts his face in this glow, and in the sense that that's there as well, so that when the passion comes, there is that at work within. And ultimately, of course, you've got this whole theme that you can then see at work in the different readings. The oh yeah, for example, in the common lectionary, we've got this, the story of Jesus um, being the I got my notes here. That the Son of Man is to be glorified and have his life restored. That's the common lectionary. While we're focused on the transfiguration, you have Jesus talking it over with Nicodemus about what's coming. So in a sense, we use that transfiguration in our lectionary as kind of the glimpse of what the other lectionary talks about in the in the gospel. And it talks about also Abraham moving. It's like, you pick up things and you're going to be made into a great nation, so on. All of that becomes a part of even the Revised Common Lectionary. The upcoming scripture readings, and you can kind of begin to build on the theme of the beginning of Lent, but coming up in the third Sunday of Lent, both the Catholic and the Protestant, for lack of a better term, the Revised Common Lectionary, all the same as you go through the readings for the rest of the Sundays. The Gospel on the third week is the cleansing of the temple. The Old Testament reading is the commandments. What happens if you don't follow the commandments? You end up with this temple filled with thieves and marketplace and so on. And it's time to clean it out, and New Testament reading for that was the whole story of the St. Paul discussing the folly of the cross, the folly and the weakness. Fourth Sunday of Lent, the gospel is that the Son of Man needs to be lifted up. That passage from John's Gospel, the conversation Jesus has with Nicodemus. When the Son of Man is lifted up, he will draw all things to himself. That's the gospel that we have for the fourth Sunday. And here too is the minor difference. The major difference between the Catholic and the Revised Common was, that whole second week of Lent, year after year. It's transfiguration, transfiguration, transfiguration. All right. This year, and only this year, we again depart from the Revised Common Lectionary on the fourth week of Lent. We use the same gospel, that the Son of Man must be lifted up, but the Old Testament reading, and this is going to take some work if you're giving a homily on the fourth Sunday of Lent, and you're trying to put these readings together. In the Revised Common Lectionary, and this is the part that makes sense to me, we have the story of the serpent in the desert. The bronze serpent is lifted up. Okay, yeah, I see the connection between the gospel and that. But the Catholic lectionary doesn't use that reading for the first reading. And I have no idea why, because it makes so much more sense. The Catholic first reading on that Sunday happens to be something from the book of Chronicles, which has got to be the dullest book in the Bible, okay? But it's the story basically of after Jerusalem had fallen and Cyrus comes along and begins the restoration process. Okay, nothing about serpents, nothing about bronze, nothing about lifting things up, other than the fact that I guess Cyrus is trying to raise up the temple for the Jews again. But in any case, I don't know why we didn't just go with the Revised Common Lectionary for that. Maybe somebody skipped it, they were putting it together. I have no idea. But again, part of it is the fact that we have these themes that run through fifth Sunday of Lent. Well, that's this is where Jesus is praying and says, Father, glorify yourself and share with me the glory. Now has the hour come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Old Testament, again, is I will write a new covenant on hearts. And again, that's the same thing, whether it's the Revised Common or the Catholic Lectionary. We're using that theme for the fifth Sunday. So in a sense, that's kind of a little bit of an overview of what's coming, and also kind of, my own little take on where it came from, how we ended up with these themes, or at least it's how I see we ended up with those themes. But I do want to say something about last year, because I didn't do this last year. But cycle A can be used in any year. I mean, we're in year B, and I've just kind of gone through 5 weeks of year B. But year A can be used in B or C as well, because it's used with the RCIA program. And I really like the scripture readings from year A. Now, there are a lot of people who don't like the readings from year A because the Gospels are a whole lot longer. I mean, these are the big, long stories from John. And it's like, yeah, we know this one. And we do know them. I mean, they're classic stories. Cycle A has, once again, begins just like all years do, with the story of Jesus's temptation in the desert. And in the second Sunday, we Catholics do the Transfiguration. But then we get into these wonderfully classic stories of Jesus's actions, and again, most of them, I believe, from John's Gospel. Third week of Lent is the woman at the well, classic story, and that has, along with it, the whole idea of the Old Testament, let those who thirst come to me, and it fits so well together. Fourth Sunday, man born blind. Who sinned, this man or his parents? Nobody sinned. It's to show God's glory. And of course, the Old Testament for that one was the whole idea of light and being able to see. Fifth, another one of the classic stories is Lazarus in year A. And again, it's I'll open your graves and you will rise from them. It's from the Old Testament. Wonderful group. It's like everybody worked on saying, what's the best group of readings we can put together for Lent? And they all said, yeah, these. Okay, now we've got 2 more years to fill out. So they come out with some of the other themes. But this is just mostly my ramblings because Ellen asked me to do this, just about a week ago, and so I started thinking, well, what have you been thinking about? And my mind wanders, and I, go back to my old STEM roots. Get the pun? Okay, the roots of the STEM. In any case, just to kind of pick through the Lenten readings and to share some thoughts on them with you, and maybe provide a context for what Dave will touch on a little later. He is more, personal and down to earth, and me, I just get caught up in all this engineering, engineering the lectionary. So those are my thoughts for this Lenten reflection. De Coloris.